Okay. Well, welcome everyone this fine Sunday evening as we welcome in Aaron Swade and Baruch Ian, Ruvain Pollack, Irving Fishbaum, Shelley Zeitlin, Mel Zachter, Stephen Holtzman, Mark Frankel's chair, Yitzi Muller, Shimon Klein, Moshe there he is, Mark Frankel. Let me just see, did he change since the last time I saw him? I stalled last night. I was waiting for you the whole night.
There we go. I'm sorry, Rabbi. I was with my in-laws, and tomorrow I have a chasana tomorrow night.
Oh, so we'll see you at the chasana.
Okay. We'll see how that goes over.
Okay. Anyway, Menachem Yemansky is joining us. And here in the shul, I am delighted to say that we have Saba, we have Berish Gesseman, we have Chaim Kramer, we have Gedalia Engel, we have Rich Leonard. So we are developing a chabura here in the shul. So Mark, anytime you want to come down live, we will be here. Regards from your nephew. Saba spoke to your nephew. We are going to learn, sponsored by Baruch Ian, who himself needs a refuah shalema. Baruch, we have you in mind that you should have from Hashem a refuah shalema, and that you should get out and be able to dance. Forget about walk. You should be able. What's your name, Baruch?
Thank you. Baruch Avraham ben Esther.
Baruch Avraham ben Esther. And we learn Lili Nishmas Esther Bas Yomi, Yaakov Chaim ben Abba, Avram ben Shmuel HaKohen, and Baruch Shlomo ben Lina should have a refuah shalema. We learn for Chai Tzipora Bas Rezel. We also learn, sponsored by Aaron Swade, Lili Nishmas, Chana Bas Shmuel, and Freda Bas Shol, by Shimon Deer for the Chayli Adaf and Chayli Yisrael, by Mark Frankel, refuah shalema for Miriam Sarah Bas Tzipora and Chana Bas Gittel Esther, by Barak Goldwasser for HaKaras HaToiv to Hashem for what he did for their family and for the Chayli Yisrael, for my Shver, Avigdor ben Rivka, and Mordechai ben Sari Yehudis. We also learn for Yehudis Cyril Bas Miriam, they should have a refuah shalema b'seich shar Chayli Yisrael. Okay, well, that was a long introduction as we get ready to learn on the bottom of Daf Chof Amid Beis, and we are holding by Eisvei. So this Eisvei is attacking Rav Shesh's position. Rav Shesh said that Botei Orei Chayma cannot be nigal l'chatzoin, and it cannot be nigal, it cannot be redeemed with borrowed money. So that means that in the event that, let's say, Berish sold a house in a walled city, he has to redeem it before the year is up, otherwise it's sold for perpetuity. He cannot borrow money to redeem it, and he cannot redeem half of it. So the Gemara asks on Rav Shesh's rule, Eisvei, im gol yigol. Now this is talking about redeeming a field that Menachem dedicated. So there we learned, Malamid Shalayva v'gayel, he could borrow money to redeem it, v'gayel l'chatzai. And remember, we said, according to Reb Shimon, that the reason why we give Menachem that allowance and that leniency is because if he doesn't redeem it by Yovel, he loses it forever. Even though it's an ancestral field, it goes to the Kahanim. Now, Sheyachel v'aloi dinu. One who sells an ancestral field that has a stronger rights. If Yovel comes, and he didn't redeem it, it goes back to him at Yovel, and yet, your weekend that you're not allowed to borrow and redeem, and you're not allowed to redeem half. Makdish Yehura Koichai. Shemigi Yovel v'loy nigala. If the Yovel comes, it's not redeemed. Yoitza the Kahanim, be Yovel, it goes to the Kahanim. Eino din Yehura Koichai she'eino loiv v'goyel l'chatzayin. So the Gemara says, well, no. This is another interesting din by a stei achuza, that if Reuven sells his ancestral field, he cannot buy it back for 2 years. So he cannot redeem it immediately. He has to wait for 2 years. Toimer b'makdish, while Menachem was makdish's field, he could redeem it immediately. So the Gemara says, well, Berish could redeem his house right away, but he can't borrow and redeem in halves. Says the Gemara, like cash, it is no difficulty. So here we see that by a walled city, you cannot be goyel by a house in a walled city. We see the Gemara says that Berish cannot borrow and redeem, and he cannot redeem it in halves, right? So that's not like Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes said that by a walled city you can borrow and redeem in half. Says the Gemara, like kasha harabanan harab Shimon. One is going according to Rabbanan. The Rabbanan hold that we don't darshan taimei dekra. And since we don't darshan taimei dekra, we don't make the svara that why by hektish could you borrow and redeem in half, because when Yovel comes, if you don't do it, you lose it forever. So the same thing would be true by Berish. If he doesn't redeem it in a year, he loses it. He can't. So there would be a svara to say that it's the same thing as hektish, and that you should be able to redeem it, borrow and redeem it in half. The Rabbanan don't darshan taimei dekra, and since the Rabbanan don't darshan taimei dekra, so therefore they say that just like by the stei achuza is hura koichai, it's weak, that it can't be redeemed immediately. You have to wait 2 years. So it's also weak in that you cannot redeem, and you cannot do it half, and you cannot borrow and redeem. So by the bayis arechaima, where after a year it's lost forever, so it's hura kaichai. So there too, according to Rabbanan, you cannot borrow and redeem in half. Reb Shimon, who darshan's taimei dekra, says that just like by hektish, if you don't redeem it, you lose it, and therefore we allow you to redeem it, borrow and redeem in half. So therefore, by Berish also, if he doesn't get it in a year, he loses his rights forever. So therefore, we give that allowance as well. Tani Choda, we learned in one braysa, loiva v'gayel l'chatzayin, that by Bati Yerechaima, he could borrow and redeem in half. So the Gemara says, well, that's consistent with what we just said. Like kasha, harabanan harab Shimon. One is going according to Rabbanan that don't darshan taimei dekra. One is going according to Reb Shimon that do darshan taimei dekra. As we welcome in Dr. Black, just getting underway over here, Dr. Black. 4 lines from the top of Daf Chof Aleph Amud Aleph. 4 lines from the top of Daf Chof Aleph Amud Aleph. And Sandy Grunfeld is joining us as well, together with Nachum Roseman, as he asks us to learn for David ben Chana, and together with Aryeh Perlman. Aryeh, it's great to have you. So now the Gemara says, Amalei Rav Achabrei Rav Ashi. Ika lemifra, we could ask on the Kal V'Chaimer that was given to us before. We had a Kal V'Chaimer that you shouldn't be able to redeem a stei achuza with borrowed money and l'chatzon, right? By a steich achuza, which comes back to him at Yovel. You still can't redeem it half and redeem it borrowed money, right? Then if you dedicate a field to Hektish, which doesn't come back at Yovel, so that's even weaker, surely you shouldn't be able to redeem it with borrowed money and with half. So again, the Kal V'chomer that we had is Ma D'Chistei Achuza, which, if you don't redeem it, comes back at Yovel. You're not allowed to redeem it with borrowed money, and you're not allowed to redeem it with half. If you dedicate a field to Hektish, which doesn't come back to you at Yovel, so surely you shouldn't be able to redeem it with borrowed money and redeem it half of it. Amalei Ravachbrei the Rav Ravashi Ikar Mifrach Mal Moicher Bayis B'Batei Arichayma Shekein Hura Koichay Ligal Olam. It's weak that it can't be redeemed forever. It can only be redeemed for 1 year. Toimer B'Makdish Sheyufa Koichay Ligal Olam. That it could be redeemed any time, right? And therefore, says the Gemara, the reason why a Moicher Bayis B'Batei Arichayma is weak in that it can't be redeemed by half and it can't be redeemed with borrowed money, that's because you can't redeem it after the first year. But by Makdish, where you could redeem it up till the Yovel, surely maybe you should be able to redeem it with borrowed money. Amalei Ravacha Sabal Ravashi Mishum De'ikal Meimad Nahader Dina. Even if you even right, so now the Gemara says we should learn out that a stei achuza should not be. We should learn out not a stei achuza, a dedicated field. We should learn out that you shouldn't be able to redeem it by half and redeem it with borrowed money, mishum de'ikal meimen nahader dina teiseh b'ma'atzad, because we should learn it out not from one but from two. Moiches te'achuza yochiach, moiches te'achuza will disprove you that it's not because the Batei Arichayma can't be redeemed until Yovel, that's the reason why you can't use borrowed money and you can't redeem it in half. Why? Because it can be redeemed forever, up to Yovel, and still you cannot redeem it with borrowed money. You'll say, that it can't be redeemed the first 2 years. That it can be redeemed right away. Each one doesn't have the deficiency of the other. In other words, Batei Arichayma doesn't have the deficiency that it can't be redeemed until the Yovel, because it can, and Batei Arichayma doesn't have the deficiency that it can't be redeemed for the first 2 years, because it can. Hatzada shavash shebehem shenigalim, that they're redeemed. Ve'ein loiva v'gayel achatzayim, and you cannot borrow money and redeem, and you cannot redeem half. So afan yovi magdish, that when you dedicate on a field, an ancestral field, to the temple, shenigo, it could be redeemed. So now the Gemara says, I still have a pircha. Wow, I'm not looking, and people are waiting. Sorry, I got concentrated in the share, and I didn't let you in. I'm sorry to everybody. I hope the magazines were good in the waiting room. As we welcome in Ben Zion Cohn, and what's his name, and Moshe from South Fallsburg, and Ilya Shutman. You look like you were in the waiting room.
Like I was in the waiting room.
Yeah, I feel bad for everybody else there. Says
I took all the magazines. I'm sorry.
Says and all the coffee.
No, the bourbon. I left the coffee for people who need caffeine.
Now the Gemara asks an interesting thing. You want to learn out from the tandem of Meicher Batei Arichaima and Stei Achuza that just like over there, you can't use borrowed funds and you can't redeem a half. So also by Makdish Sadeil. So the Gemara says, I'll show you a pircha. By both of these, you can't redeem in the second year. You can't redeem in a Stei Achuza the second year, because you have to wait 2 years. And you can't redeem by Batei Arichaima the second year, because once it's past the first year, it's sold to perpetuity. So Amalei Ma'aslutra Berei Rav Mari Ravini Ikala Mifrach Malat Sadashar B'Shebem Shekein Hura Kaicham Ligol B'Shana Shniya. It can't be redeemed the second year. Timer b'makdish sheyufa kaicha ligdal b'shana shniya. Amalei Ravina mishum le'ikel lemeima eved ivri animker la'eved kachavim yeichiach. An eved ivri that's sold to a guy will disprove you. Sheyufa kaicha ligdal b'shana shniya. You could redeem him in the second year, but ve'ein loiva v'gayel, but you can't borrow money and redeem him, and you can't gayel lechatzayin. You can't redeem him in half. We learned that out, interestingly enough, from a pasuk, Oy hisiga yadai v'niga. If he has sufficient funds and he redeems him. So we learn out from there that you have to, first of all, have sufficient to redeem in total, and also you have to have the funds, you cannot borrow it. Now, there's a lot of minutia over here that the Gemara goes through over here. We're back to Berish. Berish sells a house in a walled city. Nigel Akrivim or ain't a Nigel Akrivim? Can Berish's relatives redeem it or not? Gulasa Mistei Achuza Gamar. Do we learn out Gula from Stei Achuza? Stei Achuza, just like an ancestral field, ain't a Nigelas L'chatzayin, v'Nigelas L'krivim. It cannot be redeemed in half, but it can be redeemed by relatives. Af ha'inami ain't a Nigel L'chatzam, v'Nigel L'krivim, but it could be redeemed by relatives. O Dilma Kik Siva Geula, when it says Geula, it's written it's written about half. B'kroivim loiksiv. It's not written in proximity to the discussion of relatives, because it says umotza kidei gulasai. Umotza kidei gulasai means that you have to find the amount of the redemption. It can't be done by half. So there we learn out geula to Batei Arichaim, and it also can't be done by half. But the din of Kroivim, it doesn't say Geula next to the din of Kroivim. Amalei Einoi Nigel. That's the halachataka. A relative cannot redeem the house from the walled city for Berish. Eisvei, it says, Bechol Geula Titnu. With all you give redemption, L'rabbis Batim ve'Eved Ivri, to include houses and a Eved Ivri. My love, doesn't that mean doesn't that mean batei arei chayma, that houses in a walled city can be redeemed by relatives? Says the Gemara, loy batei chatzeirim. Houses in an unwalled city. Houses in an unwalled city has the same din as a stei achuzah. And just like a stei achuzah could be redeemed with relatives, so the Gemara says, batei chatzeirim be'ed yiksibu. Batei chatzeirim, it says, beferish, al stei ha'oretz yechoshev. It should be considered like the fields of the land. Says Gemara, hu l'koiva chayva. Says Gemara, that pasuk, u'b'chol ge'ula titnu, the pasuk of b'chol, it's coming to tell us that it's a responsibility of the relatives to redeem it. In other words, a field in a house in the Chatzeris, an open, not in a walled city, it's an obligation of the relative to redeem it. According to Rabbi Eliezer, who learns that this way by an ancestral field. He holds that if somebody sold his ancestral field, it's obligatory for the relative to redeem it. The Tanya, the Gal es mimkarachim, he should redeem his brother's sale, rishus. It's optional. You could do it. It's not mandatory. Atayim rishus, you say it's optional, or ein elachayv, maybe it's obligatory. Talmud Leimer v'ish kilo yir lo'gayel. If a man doesn't have a redeemer, so the Gemara says, what do you mean a man doesn't have a redeemer? Is there anybody that doesn't have a redeemer? V'chi yesh adam Yisrael she'ein lo'gayelim? Everybody has relatives. So what do you mean? Elazeh sheyesh lo v'ein roitza likach sherishas biyadai. He has the option. Ein lo'gayel means if he decides not to listen, I'm using my money for something else. I'm buying a cottage up in the mountains. I'm not using it to redeem. Tiv Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer, Aimer v'gal es mimker achiv. He should redeem the sale of his brother chayva. It's mandatory. Atay mechayva ayin al rishus. You'll say it's mandatory, or maybe it's optional. Talmud Leimer b'chal. In all cases, geula titnu. And when it says b'chal, in all cases, it seems to be that it's learned from the repetition. The Torah insists that if there's the relative should redeem it. Amrei Rabbanu Ravashi, V'imir la Ravina la Ravashi, Bishleim Laman Diyama L'Rabbis Batei Arei Chayma. That if you say Bachol comes to include even houses in walled cities, that it could be redeemed by relatives. Hainu d'chsib Bachol. Elamandi Amal Rabbis Batei Chatzeirim. But if it's coming to tell you houses that are not in a walled city, and it's just coming to tell you that it's a chayva, and it repeats Geula Titnu, my Bachol, why did it have to say the extra word Bachol? Says, well, that's kasha. That's a kasha. Eisve Abaya. So Abaya challenges him still about the question about whether Beresh's house in the walled city can be redeemed by relatives. Matam loyme yigalenu gimel pa'amim. It says redeem it 3 times. L'rabbis kol ha'geulais shenigolos kaseder hazeh. All redemptions could be redeemed according to this seder, which it seems to include that it could be redeemed by relatives. My love, that this is coming to include Batei Arei Chayma, the Eved Ivri, house in a walled city, and an Eved Ivri is sold to a Jew. It says, it comes to tell you that relatives can redeem houses that are not in a walled city and ancestral fields. It says, I'll stay ha'aretz yechashev. that the houses in a non-walled city is considered like the fields of the land. Says the Gemara, Kid'amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak l'karev karev kaidim, that it's coming to tell you that it goes according to the closest relative, so that the closer the relative, the closer is the obligation. Hachanami, it's coming to tell you l'karev karev kaidim. It's coming to tell you that the obligation is on a closer relative. For example, an uncle has to redeem it before a cousin. So the Torah doesn't say this by a stei achuza, and we learn that this din, that the closer relative has the obligation, we learn it out from the fact that it says Yigalenu, Yigalenu, Yigalenu 3 times. Says the Gemara, Heichi etma de Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Where was Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's statement that the closer the relative, the closer the obligation? Aha. The boy Eved Ivri Animker Yisrael, a Eved Ivri that's sold to a Jew. Now we know that the relatives redeem by an Eved Ivri that's sold to a guy, that he shouldn't be assimilated amongst the guy. But what about an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Yid? Says the Gemara, Eved Ivri Animker Yisrael, Nigel L'Krayvim, or Eina Nigel L'Krayvim. Is he redeemed by relatives or not? So, I'll leave it to Rebbe Loiti Bailach. According to Rebbe, it's not a shayla. The Amar Misha ein nigel be'ela nigel b'sheish. Someone who is not redeemed by relatives is redeemed after 6 years. So, since one who is sold to a Yid goes out at 6 years, he can't be redeemed by relatives. Alma loy mifrak. According to Rebbe, an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Yid can't be redeemed by relatives. Because he said, who's redeemed by relatives? Somebody that doesn't go out in 6 years. An Eved Ivri that's sold to a Yid goes out at 6 years, and therefore he can't be redeemed by a relative. Ki tibayalach alibad rabbanan, that argue, my. Do we say alfinon sacher? Do we say that we learn out the Gzeira Shava sacher, and therefore we learn out that just like an Eved Ivri that's sold to a guy can be redeemed by relatives, an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Yid can also be redeemed by relatives. V'loi dorshe yigalenu, and we don't darshan yigalenu redeem him as a miyat, that it's only by an Eved Ivri that's sold to a guy. You're redeemed by relatives only an Eved Ivri that's sold to a guy. But an Eved Ivri sold to a Yid cannot be redeemed by relatives. Tajma, b'chol geula titnu, by all there's a redemption. L'rabis batim ve'Eved Ivri, to include houses and Eved Ivri. Ma'alav batei areichayma, and Eved Ivri adibka Yisrael, that they could be redeemed by relatives. Says the Gemara, no. Lo Eved Ivri adibka le'vekacham. It's an Eved Ivri that's sold to a guy. Says the Gemara, Eved Ivri adibka le'vekacham be'ed yiksiv. Oy doidai oy ben doidai yigalenu. Either an uncle or the uncle's son, which is a cousin, redeems him. Hahu l'kayva yichayva, that's coming, the kol gula titnu, is coming to say that it's obligatory. Va'afilu Reb Yeshua, even according to Reb Yeshua, that says that by a stei achuza it's voluntary. The relative could use the money to buy a cottage in the country. Here he's moida by redeeming him from a guy, that you have to do it in order that you shouldn't assimilate. Like Rashi says, that he shouldn't be assimilated amongst the guy. Tashma, boy, the Gemara keeps on going over here. A lot of details over here. Tashma, ma tamid loimi yigalenu gimel pamim. L'rabbis to include that kol ha'geulos, all redemptions, shenig'olos keseder hazeh, that they're redeemed according to this order. So my love, isn't this coming to tell me that batei arei chayma, that a house of a walled city, ve'eved ivri hanimka Yisrael, that they could be redeemed by relatives? All that we just said is not true. It says it's talking about houses in an open area, which is like an ancestral field. So the Gemara says, "Batei chatzeirim behed yiksibu." It says it beferish, "I'll stay oretz yechoshev," that it's like the fields of the land. It's coming to tell you that elsewhere it says doi doi oi ben doi doi. It doesn't say it over here. It's telling you also for a house that's not in a walled city, the closer the relative has to redeem it first. So the uncle has to redeem it before the cousin. Now the Mishnah continues, Vanirtza nikna beritzia. If the Eved wants to stay beyond 6 years, so he could be acquired with the awl, by piercing his ear with the awl. And he says, Eved till Olam shall Yovel till Yovel. The one who is pierced by the awl acquires his freedom b'Yovel with the Jubilee or b'Mises Adan and the death of the master. Now, how do we know if the master dies, he's free? Maybe we should say that he's inherited by the master's son. So the Gemara says, he's his servant forever, and not the son and not the daughter. How do we know he's freed by Yovel? Because La'ila means La'ila shel Yovel. He works until the world of Yovel, until the Jubilee. Now, do you have to use an awl? Could you use a hole puncher? Could you use a stylus? So Tan Rabban Martzeya, Ainli Ela Martzeya, I only know an awl. Minayin l'rabbis hasoil, a peg, v'asira, a thorn, v'amachat, a needle, v'amagdeach, the bit of a drill, v'amachtev, a stylus. Ta'amalayim v'lakachta, l'rabbis kol davar shenicha b'yad. You should take it, anything that's taken by hand. Divrei Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi says, no, not anything. It's metal, af kol shel matchis. So you can't use a thorn. You can't use a wooden peg. It has to be metal. Davaracha hamartzeya lahavi hamartzeya gadol. Even a big hall. Amar Rebbe Lazar Yudin Beribi. Now this was a great scholar by the name of Yudin. And he was called Beribi because he was a giant of his generation. Yudin Beribi hayadirish kishem roitzim, when they pierced the ear of the Eved, ein roitzin ela b'melsa, on the fleshy lobe of the ear. The Chachamim Aimrim ein Eved every kayin nirtza, an Eved every kayin can't be stay for Yovel. That would make him a Balmum, because he holds that it's not the lobe of the ear, because the lobe of the ear would not make a kain a Balmum. He learns it's the upper cartilage of the ear. V'im Tomer b'mel same writes him, if they did it in the lobe of the ear, hey chavet every kain yas a Balmum, he wouldn't be a Balmum. Ha'ein nirtza l'begoyvish shalaylam. Eisen, you have to do it in the upper part of the cartilage of the ear, which will make a kayin of almum. Now, says the Gemara, b'may kamiflagi, what's the machlokes whether you could use a thorn, a peg, or you have to be metal? The Rebbe Dorish Klali Prata, he darshins the less inclusive klal prata klal as follows. V'lakachta klal, that's a generalization. Martzeya, the all is a prat, but oznoi bedelis, in his ear and the door, chaz of a klal, that's a generalization. Klal a prat a klal, Generalization, specification, generalization. Yatadon elikein aprat. It has to be similar to the all. Ma prat mafur shel matris. It has to be metal. Af kol shel matris. So therefore, a thorn, a wooden peg is no good. Rabbi Yaisi Darish ribuye miyute. Rabbi Yaisi Darish is the more inclusive amplification and limitation. V'lakachta riba. That's an amplification. Matzeya miyat. Ba'ozna b'del's cause of a riba. That's more inclusive. Riba miyat v'riba. Riba akol includes everything. My Rabbi kol mile. Anything that makes a hole. My miyat. Miyat sam. You can't use acid. It has to be something that punches a hole. You can't make a hole with acid. Amar Hamartseya with an awl. Lahave matseya gadol. Even a big awl. My mashma. Because it says a hey. Kidama rava ha yerech. When we say by the Gidanosha, we say that it's the right thigh. It's the unique of the awl, even a very big awl. So the hay comes to include even a very big awl. Now, for those that are just joining us, we are holding 3 lines into the wide lines on Daf Chaf Aleph from the base. I was speaking to another Maggid Shir today. He says, my goodness, how much details on today's daf. Remember, Rabbi Isai, we said that this is the source in Shas for the laws of Eved Ivri. So, says the Gemara Vayta, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Yudin beribi hayadayresh, Yudin the great man expounded, Kishein roitzin, ein roitzin ela b'melsa. They only did it by the lobe of the ear, the fleshy part of the ear. The Chacham say, ein Eved Ivri kayin nirtza, an Eved Ivri kayin can't be pierced with the awl, mipnei shenasa balmum. And if it would be the lobe of the ear, that doesn't make him a balmum. So first of all, the Gemara says, what would be the problem if you make him a balmum? V'yas a balmum, make him a balmum. Amar Rabba bar Rav Shila, Amar Krav v'shovel mishpachtoi. Afterwards, he has to be able to return to his family. It means l'mulzik sheb'mishtachtai. He has to be like the best of his family. And if you're going to make him a balmum, he's not going to be the best of his family. Ibaylo. Now the Gemara says, interesting. If you have, let's say, a kohen stole, and he's sold as an Eved Ivri, are you allowed to give him a shifcha kananas? Now, normally, an Eved Ivri can't marry a shifcha kananas. Because, there would be a pashut, because a shifcha kananas is slept with Goyim, and she's a Zaina. So, every Kohen, Maushi Yimsali Rabba Shifcha Kananas. Now, any Jew is not allowed to sleep with a Shifcha Kananas. So anyway, it's a novelty. And that's what the Gemara suggests, Kiddushu. So it's a novelty, Loishna Kahanim, Loishna Yisrael. Oidilma, Shani Kahanim, kind of a different. Hoyel Variba Ben Akasa mitzvahs Yisraelis. They have a lot of extra mitzvahs. They have to work in the Beis HaMikdash. They're not allowed to become Tomei. So Rav Amamotu, Rav says you could give a kohen a shifcha kanas. V'shmuel Amar Asa. Amalei Rav Nachman l'Rav Onan. Rav Nachman said to Rav Onan, Ki avisu beimar Shmuel, when you were in the academy of Shmuel, when Shmuel said it's Aser, B'is kumadre yitalalisu? Were you playing checkers? Were you playing dominoes? Something with wood. Were you playing backgammon? My time tamer maha. Why didn't you tell him v'chachamim? I remain every kayin nirtza. Mipnei shenasa balmum. And every kayin can't be pierced with an awl because it makes him a balmum. But if it's true that you can't give him a shifcha kananis, then that would be another reason why you can't pierce his ear. The ein rabbi Moisei shifcha kananis teifiglei de ba'ina. He has to be able to say, "Ahavti es adoni es ishti v'esbanai." I love my master, my wife, which means the shifcha kananis, and my children. Alay eitzei chavshe, and then veleke, it wouldn't be possible. So you see that he holds that by kohen it would be possible to say that, so that you could give to a kohen a shivcha kananis. It's only because you're making of a balmum that it's not allowed. And sulay midei, there's nothing more to talk. That's a refutation of Shmuel. Kohen you could give a shivcha kananis. Now here's an interesting question. If a kohen goes to battle, can he take a Yefas Tayar, the beautiful maiden? Now we'll learn now, there's a whole brouhaha about this. But we'll learn now that you're not allowed to take her unless you're Megayer her. You can't take her unless you're Megayer her. So the question is, a Kohen normally can't marry a ger. So Ibayelu, Kayin Mao be a fast tire. Do we say it's a Kiddushu? You can take this Goyish woman and forcibly megayah her. Leishna Kayin, Leishna Yisrael, and therefore we allow it even for a Kayin. Oy Dilma, or perhaps, as we welcome in Moshe Jackson, it's about time. Oy Dilma, Shani Kahanim oil v'riba by a mitzvahs yiseris, since they're given extra mitzvahs, we don't allow it. Again, Rav Amar Mutter, v'Shmuel Amar Aser. Now, what's the reason why we allow people to take her? It's because Dibra Torah Keneged Yetzer Hara. The Torah doesn't ask us anything that we cannot do. And a Yefas Torah, the Torah assessed. You're looking for Gemara? The front table over there. The Torah assessed that he won't be able to contain himself. So therefore it's allowed whether it's Yisrael or a Kohen. B'bir Rishayna de Kulei Amalei Pligi Deshari. But once he had his overpowering urge taken care of, ki pligi b'bia shnia, the second bia. Rav Amar Mutter v'Shmuel Amar Aser. Rav Amar Mutter, once it was permitted, it was permitted. Hayil v'ishterei. V'Shmuel Amar Aser, why? Dohav alo giyaris, she's a giyaris, v'giyaris l'kayin lo yichazi. And a giyaris is not permitted to a kain. Ikidamre. Others say, b'bia shnia, the second bia, everybody holds it's also. Kule'amalei pligi de'asir, David like giyaris, and the giyaris is forbidden to a kain. Ki pligi b'bia rishayna. Rav Amar Mutter, why? Because the Torah spoke to Yetzer Hara, the Holy Dibur Torah, Ela Keneged Yetzer Hara. V'Shmuel Amar Shmuel says no. The Torah says beferish that you could only take her if you could take her as a wife. And since everybody holds the second bia as aser, and you can't take her as a wife, so you can't have the first bia either. Shmuel Amar Aser, Kolecha de Karina Beisel Teit Beisecha. You could bring her into your house and have her over as a wife. Karina Bei Verisa B'Shivya, you could take her in captivity. You can't marry her like Karina Bei Verisa B'Shivya. And we'll have to learn that therefore the Rebbeinu Shalom gives an extra koyach to Kahanim that they'll be able to withstand the Yetzer Hara. Okay, we're going to stop over here.